Ringo walks in surprised with news. John's reaction left Yoko breathless. New York City, December 8th, 1980. The Dakota Building. John Lennon was home. After 5 years of silence, 5 years away from music. 5 years of being a father to Sean. He was finally ready to return. The album was done. Double fantasy. His comeback, his resurrection. Yoko was in the kitchen. Sean was napping. John was at the piano playing softly. Life was perfect. Then, a knock at the door. Not the doorbell. A knock. Urgent. Insistent. John looked up from the piano. Confused. They weren't expecting anyone. Security downstairs always called first. Another knock. Louder this time. "I'll get it," John called to Yoko. He walked to the door, looked through the peephole, and his heart stopped. Standing in the hallway was Ringo Starr, his face pale, eyes red, looking like he'd been crying. John opened the door immediately. "Ringo? What are you—" "John." Ringo's voice was shaking. "I need to talk to you, right now." John Lennon and Ringo Starr, the last two Beatles standing. Paul was alive, George was alive, but the band, the Brotherhood, that had died in 1970. 10 years of silence, 10 years of distance, 10 years of pretending they didn't need each other. But they did. Ringo had always been the peacemaker, the gentle one, the one who never took sides. When John and Paul fought, Ringo stayed neutral. When George walked out, Ringo brought him back. When the band fell apart, Ringo was the one who cried the hardest. He tried for years to get them back together. Phone calls, letters, visits. But John had been firm. The Beatles are over, Ringo. Let it go. So Ringo had let it go. Until today. Until he received a phone call that changed everything. A phone call from Paul McCartney. "Ringo, you need to get to John. Now. Before it's too late." "Too late for what?" "Just trust me. Please, go to New York. Talk to him. Tell him we need him." Ringo had caught the next flight from London, landed at JFK 3 hours ago, went straight to the Dakota, because when Paul McCartney says it's urgent, it's urgent. Hey, before we continue with this incredible story, I need to give you an important warning. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube has removed their subscriptions without notice. Just take a quick look at the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I don't want you to miss any of the exclusive content that's coming up. And while you're there, leave that powerful like that helps me a lot with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who is part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's interact. John led Ringo into the living room. Yoko appeared from the kitchen, surprised, concerned. "Ringo?" "Hello, Yoko." Ringo's voice was barely a whisper. John sat down, gestured for Ringo to do the same. "What's going on, mate? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ringo took a deep breath. His hands were shaking. "John, George is sick." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "What do you mean sick?" "Cancer. Throat cancer. They found it 2 weeks ago." John's face went white. "How bad?" Ringo looked down at his hands. "Bad, John. Really bad." Yoko gasped, covered her mouth with her hand. John stood up, walked to the window, stared out at Central Park. "Does Paul know?" "Paul's the one who told me. George called him last week. Made him promise not to tell you." John spun around. "Why the hell wouldn't he want me to know?" "Because," Ringo said, his voice breaking, "because he didn't want you to come see him out of pity. He said if you came, it had to be because you wanted to, not because he was dying." The word dying hit John like a physical blow. He's not dying. He can't be dying. John. He's only 37 years old, Ringo. People don't die at 37. But even as he said it, John knew it wasn't true. People died at 37. People died at 27. People died at any age. And George Harrison, his brother, his friend, was dying. John sat back down, put his head in his hands. I haven't talked to him in 3 years. I know. The last time we spoke, we fought. About something stupid. I don't even remember what. Ringo moved closer, put his hand on John's shoulder. That's why I'm here, John. That's why Paul sent me. What do you mean? George wants to see you, all of us, together, one last time. John looked up. His eyes were wet. He wants a reunion? Not a reunion, not the Beatles, just the 4 of us, in the same room. Before, Ringo couldn't finish the sentence. Yoko was crying now, standing in the doorway, watching her husband process the news. Where is he? John asked. London, at his home in Friar Park. When? As soon as possible. Paul's already there. He's been with George for the past week. John stood up again, started pacing. I can't just leave. I have Sean. I have the album. I have... John. Yoko's voice cut through his excuses. Go. He turned to look at her. What? Go to London. See George. Don't let this be another regret you carry for the rest of your life. John stared at his wife, the woman who understood him better than anyone. But Sean will be fine. I'll be fine. George won't be. The truth of her words hit John like a freight train. 24 hours later, John Lennon was on a plane to London. He hadn't been back to England in 5 years. Hadn't seen George in 3. Hadn't been in the same room with all 3 of his former bandmates in a decade. The flight felt endless. John couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything except George. George Harrison, the quiet Beatle, the spiritual one. The one who'd always been overlooked, always in the shadow of John and Paul. But George had been the glue, the balance, the conscience of the Beatles. And John had taken him for granted. They all had. When the plane landed at Heathrow, Ringo was waiting. Ready? Ringo asked. John nodded, unable to speak. They drove in silence to Friar Park, George's massive estate in Henley-on-Thames. The house looked the same. Gothic, beautiful, mysterious. Just like George. Paul was waiting at the door. The 2 men stared at each other. 10 years of distance between them. Then Paul did something unexpected. He hugged John. Thank you for coming, Paul whispered. How is he? John asked. Paul's face said everything. He's waiting for you. George Harrison was in his music room, sitting in a chair by the window. Looking out at his garden, he'd lost weight. His face was gaunt, his skin pale. But his eyes were still George. Hello, John. John stood in the doorway, frozen. George, you gonna stand there all day, or are you gonna come in? John walked slowly into the room, sat down across from George. You look terrible, John said. George laughed, a weak, raspy sound. You always were a charmer. They sat in silence for a moment. Then John did something he hadn't done in years. He cried. I'm sorry, George. I'm so sorry. For what? For everything. For not calling. For the fights. For taking you for granted. George reached out, took John's hand. John, stop. I should have been there. I should have. You're here now. That's what matters. Paul and Ringo appeared in the doorway. The 4 Beatles, together again. Not on stage, not in a studio, but in a quiet room, facing the end. Well, George said, looking at all of them. Took you long enough. They laughed, all of them, through tears. I didn't bring you here to be sad, George continued. I brought you here because I need to tell you something. The 3 men leaned forward. I forgive you, all of you, for everything. Paul started crying. And I need you to forgive me. For being difficult, for walking out, for holding grudges. There's nothing to forgive, John said. Yes, there is. We all hurt each other. We all said things we regret. George looked at each of them. But we were brothers. We are brothers. And I don't want to leave this world with any of that between us. What followed was the most honest conversation the 4 Beatles had ever had. They talked about the good times, the bad times, the fights, the laughter. They talked about Brian Epstein, about Hamburg, about Ed Sullivan. They talked about everything they'd been too proud to say for 10 years. And slowly, the wounds began to heal. George Harrison died on November 29, 2001, 21 years after that meeting at Friar Park. But that day in December 1980, when Ringo walked into John's apartment with the news, that changed everything. John Lennon never got to see George die because John himself was killed 8 days after returning from London, December 8, 1980, outside the Dakota Building. But in those 8 days between seeing George and his own death, John was different. He called George every day, told him he loved him, made peace with everything. And when John died, George was devastated, but he wasn't broken, because they'd had those final conversations, those final moments of brotherhood. Paul McCartney later said, "If Ringo hadn't gone to New York that day, if John hadn't gone to London, they would have both died with regrets. Instead, they died with peace." Ringo Starr became the keeper of that story, the one who brought them back together, the one who reminded them that brotherhood matters more than pride. Yoko never forgot what Ringo did. "He gave John the greatest gift," she said years later. "He gave him closure. He gave him peace." The story of that reunion became legendary among Beatles fans, not because of the music, but because of the humanity. 4 men who'd conquered the world, who'd changed music forever. But in the end, they were just brothers who needed to say goodbye. George's final words to John were, "Don't waste time on regrets. Life's too short." John carried those words with him for his final 8 days. And when he died knowing he'd made peace with his past. That's the real legacy of the Beatles. Not the songs, not the fame, not the revolution, but the brotherhood. The understanding that no matter how far apart life takes you, some bonds never break. Ringo Starr still visits George's grave every year, and every time he whispers, "Thank you for letting me bring him home," because that's what he did. He brought John home one last time, before it was too late. How many people do we need to call? How many conversations are we avoiding? And when do we realize that tomorrow might be too late?